Hi y'all, I'm Jess. Today I'm going to be going over the different parts of the brain, and this is going to be kind of the main regions, and then we're going to be looking at more specifically the limbic system and the cerebral cortex. This is going to be part one of a multi-part nervous system series, so if you want to see any more videos like that, let me know, and I hope you enjoy. So here we have the three basic regions of the brain: the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain. So firstly, the forebrain, it includes the thalamus, the hypothalamus, basal ganglia, and the limbic system and the cerebral cortex. So the thalamus is often referred to as the sensory relay station. So it takes incoming information and sends it to the regions of the brain that's most appropriate for it. The hypothalamus, as I've gone over in my hormones video, is an integral part of the endocrine system. It is the head of a lot of pathways. It is responsible for the 4 F's: the fighting, fleeing, feeding, and fornication. Next we have the basal ganglia. The basal ganglia helps smoothen movements and maintain posture. So Parkinson's disease is actually a disease of the basal ganglia. It's caused by a degeneration of the dopaminergic neurons. And a ganglion, by definition, is a structure containing multiple nerve cell bodies. They form a swelling on a nerve fiber, and so that's what you are going to see if you were to be able to see the basal ganglia clearly, is a collection of nerves with a swelling. So I'll cover the next two in a little bit more detail, but in general, the limbic system controls emotion and memory, and then the cerebral cortex is a lot of higher level functions, and that includes like the 4 lobes that you would think of when you're thinking of parts of the brain. So like the frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, and temporal lobe. The hindbrain contains the cerebellum, the medulla oblongata, and then the reticular formation, which is actually located in the pons. The cerebellum is a structure that coordinates body movements and helps maintain posture as well, so kind of similar to the basal ganglia. The medulla oblongata regulates vital functions like blood pressure, heart rate, autonomous breathing when we're sleeping, stuff like that. And then the pons contain sensory and motor pathways that connect the medulla to the cortex. So this group of structures is essentially responsible for very vital living functions. If there is damage to your hindbrain, it can be fatal, especially in the case of heartbeat regulation and autonomous breathing. Lastly, the midbrain contains the superior and the inferior colliculi. The superior colliculus takes in visual information, and the inferior colliculus takes in auditory information. So the inferior colliculus is actually why we have a startle response, reflexive startle response to sudden loud noises. And moving on to the limbic system, it is a part of the forebrain, and it contains 4 main structures. You have the hippocampus, the fornix, the amygdala, and the septal nuclei. So the hippocampus is responsible for consolidating memories and information into long-term memories, and then it can also access those memories and send them to different parts of the brain whenever it's needed. The fornix is just a way for the hippocampus to communicate with the rest of the limbic system, so it's a communication pathway. The amygdala is responsible for fear and aggression. So any defensive or aggressive behavior, a lot of that is moderated by the amygdala. And then lastly, we have the septal nuclei, which is considered one of the pleasure centers of the brain, and has been closely associated with addictive behavior. Next, we'll look at the cerebral cortex. So first we have the frontal lobe, which is located right behind the forehead, kind of this area here. And it has executive function, motor function, controls speech production, impulse control, and long-term planning. The parietal lobe is located behind the frontal lobe, so about right here. And it contains the somatosensory cortex. It controls spatial processing, orientation, and manipulation. We have the occipital lobe, which is back here in the base of your head, kinda. It's above the hindbrain, and it contains the visual cortex. And then the temporal lobe manages auditory processing, speech production, memory, and emotion. So there are several important structures, and obviously I won't be going over all of them today. These are just more of the general structures that you'll see in like more superficial understanding of anatomy. So for instance, for me on the MCAT, this was about the level that I was working with when I was studying. And so here are a few of the important structures. We have, just to kind of orient ourselves, the central sulcus, and sulcus just means groove or furrow, where a gyrus is going to be like a ridge, essentially, in the brain. The central sulcus lies between the frontal and the parietal lobe. This is where we'll kind of orient ourselves for this next couple of important structures. So the primary motor cortex is located in the precentral gyrus, so pre in front of the central sulcus, so it's the precentral gyrus of the frontal lobe. It initiates voluntary movements by sending signals directly to the spinal cord. So that a somatosensory cortex is located on the postcentral gyrus, so behind the central sulcus, and it is on a ridge, so it's a gyrus. And that essentially takes sensory information for touch, temperature, pain, and pressure. That's the somatosensory modules. So these two structures, the motor cortex and the somatosensory cortex, are very interrelated, and sometimes they're referred to as one unit as the sensory motor cortex. Next, we have the fornix and Broca's area, and this has to do with speech production and language comprehension. So the fornix area is located on the superior temporal gyrus on the temporal lobe, and it is responsible for language comprehension, so the language that we hear and how we can comprehend it. The Broca's area is in the frontal lobe. It's located on the inferior frontal gyrus. It controls the motor function of speech, so the actual production of speech and moving our mouths and some of the fine motor controls involved with that. These two structures are connected by a bundle of axons called the arcuate fasciculus, and this is a pathway between these two structures. So this creates three basic forms of aphasia, which is just like difficulty with speech or language. The first is fornix aphasia, and that's characterized by impaired language comprehension. You have Broca's aphasia, which is characterized by difficulties with speech production, so such as omitting certain words or vowels, poor grammar, feeling like the words on the tip of your tongue but not being able to actually say it is pretty common. And then you have, if there is damage to the arcuate fasciculus, which is pretty rare, you will have a arcuate fasciculus aphasia. And that is where you aren't able to repeat what you heard. There's no connection between the area that comprehends language, the fornix area, and the area that is able to produce motor functions to be able to speak, which is Broca's area. And finally, we have the prefrontal cortex. So this structure and the motor cortex make up the two main regions of the frontal lobe. It controls executive function by supervising and directing the operations of other brain regions. So the frontal lobe is considered one of the last regions of the brain to mature, and it's one of the most recent development in our evolution, along with like the rest of the cerebral cortex. All of that area is kind of newer to evolve. So if you look at functions of the cerebral cortex, it might be at a little bit of a higher level of comprehension and executive functioning compared to like the hindbrain, which manages like the blood pressure and stuff that keeps us alive as animals, essentially. So the brain is very complex, and these are just a few of the main structures that I had to go over in just kind of a general overview so you can see kind of a bigger picture with this. Obviously, there are a lot more structures and there's a lot more functions, but again, this is going to be a multi-part series, so I'll be going over different hormones, the different categorizations of the nervous systems, and just kind of anything to do with the nervous system. I've gotten really interested in it since I've taken the MCAT, and I'm excited to make them. So if you have any suggestions or anything, please put them in the comments, because I would love to make them based on that. So today we went over the main regions of the brain, and specifically the limbic system, which is in the forebrain, as well as the cerebral cortex, which is in the forebrain. So yeah, if you liked it, give it a thumbs up, let me know, and see you later. Bye.